Marcus Chen woke to the sound of voices he didn't recognize, speaking in languages that felt both ancient and impossible. His eyes snapped open to reveal a ceiling that defied every law of physics he'd ever learned. Geometric patterns that seemed to fold in on themselves, creating depths that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The surface appeared to be made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with soft, blue-white light, each pulse synchronized perfectly with his heartbeat. He tried to sit up, expecting the familiar ache of his old injuries from the mining accident on Kepler 442b, but found himself completely pain-free. More than that, he felt better than he had in years. The chronic fatigue that had plagued him since the cave-in was gone, replaced by a vitality he hadn't experienced since his 20s. His hands, scarred from decades of manual labor, were smooth and unmarked. "What the hell?" he muttered, examining his palms in the strange light. The sound of his voice seemed to trigger something in the room. The whispers that had woken him grew more urgent, more focused, and he realized with a chill that they were coming from the walls themselves. Marcus swung his legs over the edge of what he now saw was not a bed, but a raised platform made of the same crystalline material as everything else in this impossible place. The platform had somehow perfectly supported his body, conforming to a shape like the most advanced memory foam, yet solid as granite. As his feet touched the floor, the whispers stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it made his ears ring. The room around him was vast, easily the size of a cathedral, with walls that curved upward into impossible angles. Floating geometric shapes drifted slowly through the air, occasionally passing through what appeared to be solid matter without any interaction. In the distance, he could see archways leading to corridors that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon, illuminated by the same pulsing light that emanated from every surface. Memory came flooding back in fragments. He'd been part of a deep space survey mission, cataloging dead systems in the Outer Rim territories. His ship, the Endeavor, had been drawn off course by some kind of gravitational anomaly. The last thing he remembered was trying to send a distress signal as they were pulled toward what looked like a massive structure floating in the void, a structure so large it made space stations look like toys. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "Is anyone there?" The response wasn't what he expected. Instead of a voice, words formed in his mind, clear and precise, but definitely not his own thoughts. "Welcome, human. We have been waiting." Marcus spun around, looking for the source, but the room remained empty except for the floating geometric shapes and the ever-present pulse of light. "Waiting? Waiting for what?" "And who are you?"
"We are the observers. We have cataloged 10,000 species across 2 million worlds.
"We have watched civilizations rise and fall like waves against the shore of time, but in all our observations, in all our vast database of biological and cultural patterns, humans remain unique." "Unique how?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. Being alone in an alien structure was one thing. Having a conversation with disembodied voices was something else entirely. The lights in the room shifted, becoming warmer, almost golden. "You are the first species we have encountered that possesses what your kind calls hope in its truest form. Other species experience optimism based on statistical probability or faith based on empirical evidence of past successes, but humans hope against hope itself." "You see impossible odds and consider them merely challenging." Marcus couldn't help but laugh, despite the surreal nature of his situation. "You've obviously never met any humans before. We're about as pessimistic as they come. Just ask anyone stuck in a dead-end job or struggling to pay bills." "This is what makes you fascinating," the voice continued, and Marcus could swear he detected something like amusement in the mental communication. "Even in your despair, even in your darkest moments, there remains a spark that refuses to be extinguished, a voice that whispers, 'Tomorrow might be different,' even when all evidence suggests otherwise." The room around him began to shift, the walls becoming transparent to reveal the vast structure beyond. Marcus gasped as he realized the true scope of where he was, a massive complex of interconnected chambers, corridors, and structures that extended in all directions as far as he could see. It was like being inside a three-dimensional city that had been designed by beings who didn't think in terms of up and down. This facility was built by the architects, a species that achieved technological transcendence approximately 10 million years ago, the observer explained as Marcus stared in wonder. "They created us to study and preserve the knowledge of all species that might follow in their footsteps, but they included a special protocol, activated only under specific circumstances." "What kind of circumstances?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. The detection of a species capable of true transcendence, not technological, not spiritual, but something far more rare. The ability to maintain hope in the face of absolute despair. The willingness to try when failure is guaranteed. The courage to love when loss is inevitable. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And you think humans fit that description? We know they do. Your species' history is filled with impossible victories, with individuals who stood against overwhelming odds not because they believed they could win, but simply because it was the right thing to do. You have a saying, never tell me the odds. This is not bravado, Marcus Chen. This is philosophy. The mention of his name stopped him cold. How do you know who I am? We have been monitoring human civilization since you first developed radio communication. We have watched your wars, your art, your scientific discoveries, your acts of incredible kindness and unspeakable cruelty. We know about the mining accident that should have killed you, about the way you spent 3 days digging through rubble to save a coworker who was probably already dead, about how you never stopped believing you could reach him even when the rescue teams had given up. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering those 3 days in the collapsed mine shaft. The weight of tons of rock above him, the sounds of the mountains settling, the certainty that each breath might be his last. But somewhere in the darkness, he'd heard Tommy Rodriguez calling for help, and that had been enough. It didn't matter that Tommy had been dead for hours by the time Marcus reached him. What mattered was the trying. This is what we mean, the observer continued gently. Hope is not about success or failure. Hope is about the willingness to act in the face of uncertainty, to believe in possibilities that cannot be proven. It is the most powerful force in the universe, and yet it is so rare that in 10 million years of observation we have encountered it in its pure form only once. With humans, Marcus said quietly. With humans. The room shifted again, and Marcus found himself standing on what appeared to be an observation deck overlooking the vast interior of the structure. Below him he could see other chambers, some filled with strange machinery, others containing what looked like entire ecosystems under transparent domes. In the distance, massive screens displayed images of stars and galaxies, constantly shifting as if showing real-time views of the cosmos. This is all very flattering, Marcus said, but I'm just a miner from the outer colonies. I'm nobody special. That is exactly what makes you special, the observer replied. You see yourself as ordinary, yet you act in extraordinary ways without even realizing it. When your ship was pulled into our collection field, your first instinct was not to panic, not to despair, but to immediately begin working on a solution. Even as you were losing consciousness, you were still trying to fix the communications array. Marcus remembered that now. The way his hands had kept moving even as the world went dark around him, still reaching for tools that might help him send a message to warn other ships about the anomaly. It hadn't seemed heroic at the time, just necessary. What happened to my crew, he asked, sudden panic gripping him. Are they alive? Are they here? They are safe, the observer assured him. They have been placed in temporary stasis while we complete your evaluation. The process should cause them no discomfort, and they will have no memory of the time that has passed. Valuation? What kind of evaluation? The chamber around him began to change once more, the walls reshaping themselves into something that resembled a vast library, with shelves stretching impossibly high in all directions. But instead of books, the shelves held floating orbs of light, each one pulsing with information. The architects left us with a simple directive, the observer explained. When we encountered a species with true transcendent potential, we were to offer them a choice. Not a test, not a challenge, but a genuine choice with real consequences. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, and the pulsing light around him responded immediately, growing brighter. What kind of choice? The choice to become what you are capable of becoming. The architects discovered something remarkable in their final years. That consciousness itself is not bound by the laws of physics as they understood them. That, with the right catalyst, a truly hopeful species could transcend not just their physical limitations, but the limitations of reality itself. You're talking about becoming gods, Marcus said flatly. No. Gods impose their will upon reality. What we offer is something far more remarkable. The ability to work with reality, to coax it into new configurations through the power of applied hope, to make the impossible merely improbable, and the improbable merely challenging. Marcus stared at the floating orbs of light around him, each one representing the accumulated knowledge of an entire civilization. The scope of it was overwhelming, but what struck him most was not the vastness of the information, but the fact that it was being offered freely. And if I say no, he asked, then you and your crew will be returned to your ship with no memory of this encounter. Your vessel will be repaired and resupplied, and you will be sent on your way to complete your mission. We will continue our observations and wait for the next opportunity. Which might never come. Which might never come, the observer agreed. Marcus walked to the edge of the observation platform and looked out over the vast complex again. Somewhere in this impossible place his crew was sleeping peacefully, unaware that the fate of their entire species might rest on the decision of a man who still thought of himself as just a miner with steady hands and a stubborn streak. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course." "In all your observations of humanity, what's the worst thing you've seen us do?" There was a long pause before the observer replied. "You make war over resources that could be shared. You harm those who are different from you out of fear. You often ignore suffering that you have the power to alleviate. And the best, a mother shielding her child from a bomb blast with her own body. A teacher staying behind to help students escape a burning school. A scientist working for decades on a cure for a disease that affects only a few thousand people, knowing he will never see financial reward. A miner digging through collapsed rock for 3 days to reach someone who was probably already dead." Marcus smiled despite himself. "So you've seen what we're capable of, both the good and the bad." "This is why the choice must be genuine," the observer said. "The power we offer could be used to heal the galaxy, to bring hope to species that have lost it, to solve problems that have plagued civilizations for millennia. Or it could be used to impose humanity's will upon the universe, to reshape reality according to your preferences. How do I know I'm worthy of that kind of power?" "You cannot know. That is the point. Worthiness is not something that can be determined in advance. It must be demonstrated through action. What we offer is not the guarantee of making the right choices, but the ability to make meaningful choices at all." Marcus was quiet for a long time, thinking about his life, about the choices he'd made, about the people he'd tried to help, and the times he'd failed. He thought about humanity as a whole, flawed, struggling, often cruel, but also capable of incredible beauty and selflessness. "If I accept," he said finally, "what happens to me? Do I stop being human?" "You become more human than any human who has ever lived," the observer replied. "You become what your species has always had the potential to be, a force for hope in a universe that has forgotten what hope means." The lights around him pulsed brighter, and Marcus realized that his heartbeat had synchronized not just with the facility but with something much larger, a rhythm that seemed to encompass the entire structure and perhaps beyond. "I need to think about this," he said.
"Of course. Take all the time you require."
"But know this. The choice, once made, cannot be undone, and the responsibility that comes with it will be unlike anything you have ever experienced." As if responding to some unspoken command, the chamber began to transform once more, becoming a comfortable living space with what appeared to be a bed, a table, and even a small kitchen area. The details were perfect, as if the observer had reached into his memories and recreated his favorite elements from every home he'd ever known. "Rest," the observer said, its mental voice growing fainter. "Consider carefully. And remember, whatever you decide, it will be respected." As the presence withdrew, Marcus found himself alone in the crystalline chamber, surrounded by impossible technology and faced with an impossible choice. Outside the transparent walls, the vast structure continued its ancient vigil, waiting patiently for his decision. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his hands, hands that had spent years digging through rock and metal, hands that had pulled Tommy Rodriguez from the rubble even though it was too late, hands that were somehow unmarked despite decades of hard labor. Somewhere in this place, his crew was sleeping safely. Somewhere beyond the structure, the universe continued its slow dance of creation and destruction. And here, in this moment between moments, a simple miner from the outer colonies held the future of his species in his perfectly ordinary, completely extraordinary hands. The whispers had stopped, but Marcus could feel them waiting just beyond the edge of hearing, ready to resume their ancient vigil. The question was no longer whether he was worthy of the choice before him. The question was whether he was brave enough to make it. Marcus had been alone with his thoughts for what felt like hours when the observer returned, its presence filling the chamber like a gentle tide. This time, however, something was different. The mental voice carried with it images, sensations, and emotions that weren't his own, a deeper level of communication than before. "You have questions," the observer stated. It wasn't asking. "A few thousand," Marcus admitted, standing up from where he'd been sitting at the edge of the crystalline bed. "But let's start with the obvious one. You say you've been watching humanity for decades, cataloging our behavior. So you know what happens when we get power we're not ready for. Indeed, nuclear weapons. Genetic manipulation, artificial intelligence, each breakthrough carrying the potential for either transcendence or destruction. And we've come pretty close to destroying ourselves with every single one. Marcus walked to the transparent wall and pressed his palm against it. The surface was warm, almost alive. So why would you trust us with something like this? The chamber around him shifted, and suddenly he was standing in what appeared to be a vast amphitheater. The walls displayed moving images, scenes from human history that played out like a three-dimensional movie around him. He watched the first atomic bomb test, the moment when Robert Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." Power itself is neutral, the observer explained as the images continued to flow around them. The question is not whether humanity can handle power, but whether humanity can handle the responsibility that comes with it. And in this, your species has shown something remarkable. The scenes shifted, showing other moments from history. Marcus watched Jonas Salk refuse to patent the polio vaccine, ensuring it could be distributed freely. He saw the International Space Station, where former enemies worked together in the vacuum of space. He witnessed acts of individual heroism and sacrifice that had never made it into history books. "You only see the good stuff," Marcus said, but even as the words left his mouth, new images appeared. Wars, genocides, environmental destruction, the worst impulses of humanity on full display. "We see all of it," the observer corrected gently. "The difference is in how we interpret what we observe. Most species, when they achieve significant power, use it to impose their will upon others. Humans use it to impose their will upon problems. That's a very generous interpretation. Consider the evidence. Your species develops nuclear technology and immediately begins working on nuclear medicine. You create computer networks for military purposes and transform them into tools for global communication and education. You discover genetic engineering and focus primarily on eliminating disease rather than enhancing yourselves." Marcus watched the images continue to flow. The Human Genome Project, the development of the Internet, medical advances that had extended human life and reduced suffering. It was true that most of humanity's greatest technological achievements had been quickly redirected toward helping others. But we also create weapons. We fight wars. You create weapons to defend the things you value. You fight wars to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Even your conflicts, violent and tragic as they are motivated by competing visions of how to make the universe a better place. The amphitheater dissolved, and Marcus found himself in a new space. What appeared to be a laboratory filled with equipment he couldn't begin to understand. Crystalline constructs floated in geometric patterns around the room, each one humming with barely contained energy. "What is this place?" he asked. "A testing facility," the observer replied. "Not to test you. We have already determined that humanity possesses the necessary psychological traits for transcendence. This is to test whether you can understand and safely utilize the abilities you would gain." Marcus approached one of the floating constructs, a complex arrangement of angular crystals that seemed to fold in on themselves in impossible ways. As he got closer, information flooded his mind, not words or images, but pure understanding of concepts that human language couldn't adequately describe. "That is a reality anchor," the observer explained. "One of the basic tools you would learn to use. It allows conscious will to influence probability patterns in local space-time. You're talking about changing the laws of physics through willpower. Not changing them, working within them in ways that most species cannot conceive. Your scientists have already discovered that observation affects quantum phenomena. This is simply an extension of that principle." Marcus stared at the construct, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. "Show me." The crystal arrangement pulsed, and suddenly Marcus could feel something he had no words for, a sense of connection to the fundamental structure of reality itself. It was like suddenly being able to hear a song that had been playing all around him his entire life without him realizing it. "Focus on something simple," the observer instructed. "Choose an outcome that is improbable but not impossible." Marcus looked around the room and spotted a small piece of debris floating near one of the walls, probably a fragment from some ancient experiment. He concentrated on it, trying to will it to move toward him. Nothing happened. "You are thinking like a human," the observer said, and Marcus could swear he detected gentle amusement. "Trying to impose your will through force. Hope does not demand, it invites." Marcus took a deep breath and tried a different approach. Instead of demanding that the debris move, he simply hoped it would. He imagined it drifting toward him naturally, as if carried by some unfelt breeze. The fragment began to move. It was barely perceptible at first, just a slight shift in its trajectory, but as Marcus maintained his hopeful focus, the movement became more pronounced. The debris accelerated, tumbling gently through the air until it came to rest in his outstretched palm. "Holy shit," he whispered, staring at the small piece of crystalline material. "Language, Marcus," the observer chided, but the mental voice carried warmth. "Though your reaction is understandable. You have just performed your first act of conscious reality manipulation." Marcus turned the fragment over in his hands, examining it closely. It looked ordinary enough, just a piece of broken crystal, but holding it felt significant in a way he couldn't explain. How is this possible? "This violates everything we know about physics. Does it? Or does it simply reveal that your current understanding of physics is incomplete? Your own scientists theorize about consciousness playing a role in quantum mechanics. Some have even suggested that observation itself might be a form of interaction with fundamental forces." The laboratory around them began to shift again, becoming a vast observatory filled with floating displays showing distant galaxies, star systems, and what appeared to be real-time views of civilizations scattered across the cosmos. "Let us show you why this matters," the observer said. The displays zoomed in on a particular star system, revealing a planet that might have once been beautiful but was now clearly dying. The continents were brown and lifeless, the oceans dark with what appeared to be industrial pollution. In orbit around the planet, Marcus could see the skeletal remains of massive space habitats. "The Catherine Collective," the observer explained. "Once a thriving civilization of 12 billion individuals. They achieved faster-than-light travel, mastered genetic engineering, developed artificial intelligence that could solve any mathematical problem in seconds. What happened to them? They lost hope." The simple statement carried with it a weight of profound sadness. Not all at once. It was a gradual process. Each generation became slightly more cynical, slightly more focused on personal gain rather than collective benefit. They began to believe that problems were unsolvable rather than merely difficult. Marcus watched as the displays showed archived footage of the Kithran civilization at its height. Vast cities that stretched across continents, space elevators reaching toward the stars, massive projects that demonstrated incredible ingenuity and cooperation. "They had the technology to save themselves right until the end," the observer continued. "The knowledge, the resources, the infrastructure. What they lacked was the will to try. When faced with their first truly difficult challenge, a cascade failure in their planetary ecosystem, they simply gave up. And you think humanity would handle it differently? We know you would. Your history is filled with examples of humans facing impossible odds and finding a way forward. Sometimes through ingenuity, sometimes through sheer stubborn persistence, but always through the fundamental belief that solutions exist even when they cannot be seen." The displays shifted again, showing other civilizations, some thriving, others in various stages of decline. The successful civilizations all seemed to share certain traits: cooperation, curiosity, and most importantly, a willingness to attempt solutions even when success seemed unlikely. "This is what transcendence actually means," the observer explained. "Not the acquisition of godlike power, but the ability to inspire hope in others when they have lost it themselves, to be a force for possibility in a universe that often seems determined to prove that possibility is an illusion." Marcus studied the images around him, trying to absorb the scope of what he was seeing. "How many species have you offered this to? In 10 million years?" "Only 3. What happened to the other 2? The displays went dark for a moment, and when they returned they showed empty star systems. No planets, no space habitats, just the cold radiation of ancient stellar explosions. The first accepted immediately, without consideration. They became intoxicated by their new abilities and attempted to reshape the universe according to their own preferences. They ignored the natural consequences of their actions until those consequences destroyed not only them, but their entire stellar neighborhood." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "And the second?" "They declined, believing themselves unworthy of such responsibility. They returned to their homeworld and gradually lost the spark that had attracted our attention in the first place. They still exist, but they have become diminished." The weight of the choice before him settled more heavily on Marcus's shoulders. Not just the responsibility of accepting transcendence, but the recognition that either choice carried enormous consequences. "Why me specifically?" he asked. "I mean, why not offer this to our leaders, or our scientists, or our philosophers? People who might actually know what to do with it? Because leaders are concerned with controlling outcomes. Scientists are focused on understanding mechanisms. Philosophers debate the nature of reality. You simply act to help others, regardless of whether you understand the mechanisms or can control the outcomes." The laboratory dissolved around them, and Marcus found himself back in the original chamber where he had first awakened. But now it felt different, less alien, more familiar. The crystalline walls pulsed gently with his heartbeat, and he realized that the rhythm was not just synchronized with his physical body, but with something deeper. "There is something else you should understand," the observer said. "The choice we offer is not just for you. Transcendence, once achieved by even a single individual, becomes available to their entire species. Not automatically. Each person must still choose for themselves, but the potential spreads like a contagion of hope." Marcus sat down heavily on the crystalline platform, overwhelmed by the implications. "You're saying that if I accept this, other humans could follow?" "Eventually. The process is gradual, measured in generations rather than years. But yes, the potential for transcendence becomes part of your species' inheritance."
And if they misuse it?
"Then they will face the same consequences as any species that chooses power over responsibility. The universe is remarkably efficient at correcting such mistakes." Marcus was quiet for a long time, thinking about his crew sleeping somewhere in this vast structure, about the billions of humans back on Earth and scattered across the colonies, about the fragile balance of hope and cynicism that seemed to define his species. "Can I see them?" he asked finally. "My crew?" "If you wish." The chamber around him became transparent, and Marcus found himself looking down into another room where 5 figures lay on crystalline platforms, similar to the one he had awakened on. He recognized them immediately: Captain Sarah Mitchell, Dr. James Park, Engineer Lisa Santos, Navigator Tom Bradley, and Communications Specialist Maya Okafor. They looked peaceful, as if they were simply sleeping after a long shift. They're really okay? They are experiencing pleasant dreams based on their own memories and hopes. Captain Mitchell is reliving her daughter's graduation. Dr. Park is solving a particularly challenging medical puzzle. They are in no distress. Marcus pressed his hand against the transparent barrier, wishing he could somehow communicate with them, let them know that everything would be all right. But how could he make that promise when he didn't even know what all right meant anymore? "They are fortunate to have you as their advocate," the observer noted. "Your concern for their well-being, even in the face of this momentous choice, is exactly the trait we hope to find." "I can't make this decision just for myself," Marcus said. "It affects all of them, affects all of humanity. That's too much responsibility for one person, and yet someone must choose. This is the fundamental paradox of transcendence. It requires individual courage to achieve collective benefit." The architects designed the system this way deliberately, believing that species capable of true transcendence would produce individuals willing to bear such responsibility. Marcus watched his sleeping crewmates and thought about the conversation he'd had with Maya just before they encountered the gravitational anomaly. She'd been talking about her plans when they returned to Earth: a small apartment near the ocean, a job teaching children about the stars, maybe even a family someday. Simple dreams, but filled with quiet hope. "If I accept," he said slowly, "how do I know I won't change? How do I know I'll still be human enough to make decisions that are good for humanity?" "You cannot know," the observer replied honestly. "But consider this. The very fact that you ask the question suggests that you will remain grounded in your humanity regardless of what abilities you gain. Those who lose themselves in power typically never worry about losing themselves." The images of his crew faded, and Marcus found himself alone in the chamber once more. The crystalline walls pulsed with patient light, waiting for his decision. Somewhere beyond this place, the universe continued its ancient dance, unaware that a simple miner was about to make a choice that could reshape the destiny of an entire galaxy. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about hope, not the naive optimism that ignored reality, but the quiet certainty that tomorrow could be different from today if someone was willing to work for it. He thought about Tommy Rodriguez, dead for hours but still worth digging toward. He thought about his crew, trusting him to find a way home. He thought about humanity, flawed and struggling, but always reaching for something better. When he opened his eyes, the observer was waiting. "I need to know one more thing," Marcus said. "If I do this, if I accept transcendence and somehow inspire my species to become something greater, what happens to the people who choose differently? What happens to the humans who just want to live quiet lives, who don't want the responsibility of changing the universe?" "They continue to be human," the observer replied gently. "Transcendence is not a requirement. It is simply an option. Those who choose it become gardeners, tending to hope wherever they find it. Those who decline become the garden itself, the foundation upon which all hope grows." The answer satisfied something deep in Marcus's soul. This wasn't about forcing humanity to evolve or imposing change from above. It was about providing tools to those willing to use them, while preserving the essential humanity that made such tools worth having. "Okay," he said quietly. "I think I understand now. Have you reached a decision?" Marcus looked around the chamber. One more time at the impossible geometry and the patient light, at the artifacts of a civilization so advanced they had transcended physical existence itself. But most of all he thought about the simple question that had been with him since he was a child working in the mines of his home colony. How do you help? Yes, he said. I have. The chamber fell silent as Marcus spoke his decision, but the silence felt different now, not empty but full of potential. The crystalline walls around him began to resonate with a frequency he could feel in his bones, a deep harmonic that seemed to reach into the fundamental structure of reality itself. You accept transcendence, the observer stated. It wasn't a question. I do, Marcus confirmed, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. But I want to understand exactly what that means. No more metaphors, no more vague explanations. If I'm going to become something new, I need to know what I'm becoming. The chamber around him transformed one final time, becoming something that defied description. It was as if the walls had become windows into the quantum foam that underlied all existence, revealing the invisible connections that bound every atom in the universe to every other atom. Marcus could see probability streams flowing like rivers of light, branching and merging according to laws that went deeper than physics. Transcendence is the conscious evolution of possibility, the observer explained, its mental voice now carrying harmonics that resonated with the quantum frequencies surrounding them. Every conscious being influences reality through observation and choice, but that influence is typically limited by biological constraints and psychological barriers. Transcendence removes those barriers. Marcus watched the probability streams flow around him, beginning to understand that what he was seeing wasn't theoretical, it was actual. These were the pathways that connected every potential outcome in the universe, the hidden architecture that determined which possibilities became reality. Show me how it works, he said. Focus on your crewmate Maya, the observer instructed. Think about her dreams of teaching children about the stars. Marcus concentrated on Maya, remembering their conversation about her plans for the future. As he focused, one of the probability streams brightened, showing him potential paths that led from this moment to outcomes where Maya achieved her dreams. But mixed among those bright paths were darker threads, possibilities where she never made it home, where circumstances prevented her from pursuing her goals, where hope gradually faded into resignation. Now, the observer continued, instead of simply observing these possibilities, reach out and touch the brightest path. Marcus extended his consciousness toward the stream of light that showed Maya successfully teaching a classroom full of eager children. As his awareness made contact with the probability thread, he felt something extraordinary happen. The path became more likely, more real, as if his attention had somehow strengthened its connection to the present moment. This is the fundamental principle of transcendence, the observer explained. Hope, when properly focused, becomes a force that enhances positive possibilities while diminishing negative ones. You do not create outcomes. You nurture the seeds that already exist in the quantum substrate of reality. But that's... Marcus paused, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. That's not magic. That's not breaking the laws of physics. That's working with something that was already there. Precisely. The architects discovered that consciousness itself is a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism, but far more subtle and complex. Most species never developed the psychological tools to access it consciously, but humans possess the necessary combination of imagination and determination. The probability streams around them shifted and flowed, and Marcus began to see the broader pattern. Every conscious choice created ripples that influenced other possibilities, creating cascade effects that could strengthen or weaken entire clusters of outcomes. Your species has been unconsciously using this ability for millennia, the observer continued. Every act of courage, every expression of hope, every refusal to accept defeat has been subtly shifting probability in favor of positive outcomes. Transcendence simply allows you to do this consciously and with far greater precision. Marcus thought about the implications of what he was learning. If I accept this, if I become transcendent, what happens to my physical body? Do I stop being human? Watch, the observer instructed. The quantum landscape around him faded, replaced by a mirror-like surface that showed Marcus his own reflection. But as he watched, the reflection began to change. He saw himself as he might become, still recognizably human, but somehow more present, more real than the people around him. His eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies, and when he smiled, the expression carried hope like a physical force. Your body will be enhanced, but not fundamentally altered, the observer explained. Improved healing, extended lifespan, enhanced mental capacity, but you will remain human in every way that matters. The true change will be in your consciousness, and your ability to perceive and influence the deeper patterns of reality. And my crew? What do I tell them? Nothing at first. Transcendence cannot be forced or rushed. They must reach their own understanding in their own time. Your role will be to live as an example, to demonstrate through your actions what humanity can become. The mirror faded, and Marcus found himself standing once more in the original chamber. But now he could see things he had missed before. The subtle energy flows that connected every surface, the way the observer's presence created patterns in the quantum foam, the delicate balance of forces that kept the entire structure stable across impossible spans of time. "Are you ready to begin the process?" the observer asked. Marcus took a deep breath, thinking one more time about his crew, about humanity, about the vast responsibility he was accepting. Then he nodded. "Place your hand on the central console." A crystalline structure emerged from the floor near Marcus's feet, its surface covered with symbols that seemed to shift and flow like living things. As he approached it, the symbols resolved into something he could understand. Not words or numbers, but pure concepts that conveyed meaning directly to his consciousness. The console was asking for his consent not just to accept transcendence, but to accept the responsibility that came with it. To become a guardian of hope in a universe that had largely forgotten what hope meant. To dedicate his enhanced existence to nurturing possibility wherever he found it. Marcus placed his palm on the console's surface. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Energy poured into him from directions he couldn't name, reshaping his consciousness at levels he hadn't known existed. For a moment, he experienced existence from the perspective of the quantum foam itself, every particle in the universe singing in harmony, every probability stream flowing toward outcomes determined by the collective choices of trillions of conscious beings. He saw the birth and death of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless dance of creation and destruction that defined the cosmos. But more than that, he saw the threads of hope that connected every conscious being, the shared dreams and aspirations that created meaning in the face of entropy. And in that moment of cosmic awareness, Marcus understood why humanity was special. Other species achieved transcendence through knowledge, through power, through spiritual discipline. Humans achieved it through something far simpler and far more profound, the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. The energy flow stabilized, and Marcus found himself back in the chamber, but everything had changed. He could feel the observer's presence not as an alien voice in his mind, but as a fellow guardian, a consciousness dedicated to preserving and nurturing the spark of hope wherever it arose. "Welcome," the observer said, and for the first time Marcus heard warmth and genuine emotion in the mental voice. "You are no longer alone in this task." Marcus flexed his fingers, marveling at the way he could now see the probability streams flowing around even his simplest movements. When he intended to pick up the crystal fragment he had moved earlier, the action became inevitable before he even began, as if reality itself was cooperating with his will. "This is incredible," he breathed. "I can see everything. The connections between all things, the way choices create ripples that affect outcomes across space and time. This is only the beginning. Your abilities will grow as you learn to use them. But remember, power without wisdom is destruction, and wisdom without compassion is meaningless. You must learn to balance enhancement of possibility with respect for free will." Marcus nodded, understanding the warning. He could feel the temptation already, the urge to reach out and fix problems by manipulating probabilities directly. But he could also see how such actions would rob others of the opportunity to grow, to choose, to become more than they were. "My crew," he said suddenly. "How long have I been here? How long will it take them to understand what's happened? Time flows differently in this space. From their perspective, you have been unconscious for perhaps an hour. They will awaken naturally, believing they have experienced a minor accident with no lasting effects. As for understanding, that may take years or decades. Transcendence cannot be explained, only experienced. But your presence will gradually influence their development, strengthening their natural human tendency toward hope and possibility." The chamber began to shift around them, becoming simpler, more recognizably human in its proportions. Marcus realized that the observer was preparing to return him to his normal existence, but he had one more question. "The architects," he said. "What happened to them? If they created all this, if they achieved transcendence, where are they now?" "They became something beyond individual existence," the observer replied. "Not dead, not ascended, but distributed throughout the quantum substrate itself. They are the gentle pressure that keeps the universe evolving toward greater complexity and consciousness. When you enhance a positive probability, you are working with their influence. Marcus felt a profound sense of connection to these ancient beings he would never meet, guardians who had chosen to become part of the fundamental structure of reality itself in order to help others achieve what they had achieved. "It is time," the observer said gently. "Your crew will be waking soon, and they will need you to be the Marcus Chen they know, even though you are now more than that." The chamber around him began to fade, becoming translucent as the normal world reasserted itself. Marcus found himself lying on what appeared to be a medical bed in the sick bay of his ship, the Endeavor. Familiar sounds filled his ears, the hum of life support, the quiet beeping of monitoring equipment, the distant vibration of engines. But beneath those familiar sounds, Marcus could hear something new, the quantum symphony that connected all things, the gentle music of possibility that permeated every corner of existence. He was back in his normal life, but he would never be quite normal again. Remember, the observer's voice whispered one last time before fading entirely. "You are not alone. There are others like you scattered throughout the galaxy, guardians who have accepted the same responsibility. When you are ready, you will find them." Marcus opened his eyes to find Dr. Park leaning over him with a concerned expression, running a medical scanner over his chest. "Marcus? Thank God you're awake. We were starting to worry." "What happened?" Marcus asked, playing his role while marveling at how easily he could now see the probability streams flowing around his crewmate. Dr. Park was a good man who worried too much about things beyond his control, but who had dedicated his life to healing others. The threads of possibility around him glowed with quiet purpose, gravitational shear from that structure we encountered, Dr. Park explained. "The whole ship got caught in some kind of field effect. You hit your head when we were pulled off course, but the scans show no serious damage." Marcus sat up carefully, noting how his enhanced perception allowed him to see the stress patterns in the ship's hull, the subtle energy fluctuations in the life support systems, the probability threads that connected each crew member to their hopes and fears. The others? All fine. Captain Mitchell is running diagnostics on the navigation system, trying to figure out exactly what happened. That structure, whatever it was, it's gone now. Just vanished like it was never there. Marcus nodded, understanding that the observer had returned them to normal space with their memories intact but incomplete. They would remember encountering something extraordinary, but would lack the context to understand its true significance. "I should get back to work," Marcus said, swinging his legs over the side of the medical bed. "The survey mission can wait," Dr. Park interrupted firmly. "You're staying in sickbay for observation for at least another 12 hours. Captain's orders." As Dr. Park turned to update his medical logs, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. He could see the probability threads that led to successful completion of their mission, to safe return home, to each crew member achieving their dreams, and now, for the first time in his life, he could do more than simply hope for positive outcomes. Now he could nurture them into existence. The journey home would take several weeks. Marcus realized that would give him time to learn how to use his new abilities subtly, how to enhance possibilities without his crew realizing anything had changed. By the time they returned to human space, he would have begun the long process of becoming what humanity needed him to be. Outside the sickbay porthole, the stars waited patiently, their light carrying the dreams and hopes of billions of conscious beings across the galaxy. Marcus settled back onto the medical bed, closed his eyes, and began to listen to the quantum symphony that connected all things. The observer was gone, but its gift remained. And with that gift came a responsibility that would define the rest of his existence. To be a guardian of hope in a universe that desperately needed to remember what hope could accomplish. The whispers in the ruins had found their answer. Humanity was ready to take its next step forward, guided by a simple miner who understood that the greatest power in the universe was the willingness to never give up on tomorrow. The journey back to human space took 3 weeks, and every day brought new revelations about what Marcus had become. He learned to modulate his perception, filtering the constant stream of probability data so he could function normally around his crew. But even with his enhanced senses dampened, the change in his awareness was profound. He could see the stress patterns in the ship's hull before they became visible to sensors. He could sense when a crew member was about to make a mistake and subtly adjust circumstances to prevent accidents. Most remarkably, he could feel the emotional undercurrents that flowed between his teammates, the unspoken fears and hopes that shaped their daily interactions. "You're different," Maya observed on the 5th day, cornering him in the ship's small galley during the night shift. The rest of the crew was sleeping, and the soft hum of the life support systems provided a gentle backdrop to their conversation. Marcus looked up from the probability threads he'd been examining around the coffee maker, streams of possibility that showed whether the aging machine would continue functioning for the remainder of their journey. Different how? Calmer. More present, I guess. Maya poured herself a cup of the synthetic coffee. That was all they had left, grimacing at the taste. Before the accident, you were always fidgeting, always looking for something to fix or improve. Now you just... She was right, Marcus realized. The constant low-level anxiety that had driven him to work compulsively on any available project had vanished. He could see potential problems before they developed into actual emergencies, which eliminated the need for the frantic troubleshooting that had defined so much of his life. Maybe getting knocked unconscious reset my brain chemistry, he said lightly, though he could see the probability threads that connected Maya's curiosity to deeper questions she wasn't yet ready to ask. Maybe. Or maybe almost dying puts things in perspective. Marcus felt a pang of guilt about the deception, even though he knew it was necessary. Maya was too intelligent not to notice changes in her crewmates, but she wasn't ready to hear about transcendence and quantum consciousness. Not yet. Instead, he focused on a probability thread that showed Maya finding the courage to apply for the teaching position she'd been dreaming about when they returned to Earth. The path was already bright with potential, but Marcus gave it a gentle enhancement, strengthening the likelihood that the right opportunities would present themselves at the right time. "What are you going to do when we get back?" he asked, knowing the question would help solidify her resolve. Maya's face lit up with enthusiasm, and Marcus could see the hope threads around her brighten in response to his subtle influence. "There's a position opening up at the new Geneva Education Center. They need someone to teach stellar cartography to kids from the outer colonies. It's perfect, combining astronomy with practical skills that children can use." "That sounds amazing. You should apply as soon as we dock." "I was thinking about it, but..." Maya hesitated, and Marcus could see the darker probability threads that represented her self-doubt. "What if I'm not qualified? What if they want someone with more teaching experience?" This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for, an opportunity to strengthen positive outcomes without manipulating Maya's free will. He reached out with his enhanced consciousness and gently touched the probability stream that showed her succeeding in the application process. "Maya, you spent 2 years training new miners on Kepler Station before you joined the Survey Corps. You know how to explain complex concepts to people who've never encountered them before." That's exactly what teaching is. As he spoke, Marcus could feel the probability patterns shifting. Maya's confidence was growing, which strengthened the likelihood of her pursuing the position, which in turn increased the chances of her succeeding, but the choice remained entirely hers. "You really think I could do it?" she asked. "I think you'd be brilliant at it," Marcus said, and meant every word. The probability threads around Maya were blazing with potential now, painting futures where she inspired generations of children to reach for the stars. They talked for another hour about her plans, about the challenges of teaching children who came from difficult backgrounds, about the ways that education could break cycles of poverty and despair. Marcus listened and offered encouragement, all while subtly reinforcing the positive possibilities he could see surrounding her future. When Maya finally went to bed, Marcus remained in the galley, practicing his new abilities on smaller probability patterns. He enhanced the likelihood that Dr. Park's chronic back pain would respond well to the new treatment protocol he'd been considering. He strengthened the chances that Captain Mitchell's daughter would choose to pursue her interest in aerospace engineering despite pressure from her friends to follow a more traditional path. None of these interventions guaranteed outcomes. They simply made positive possibilities more likely while leaving all the actual choices to the people involved. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant attention to the distinction between helping and controlling. Over the following weeks, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what transcendence meant. It wasn't just about manipulating probability on a personal level. It was about becoming a catalyst for hope wherever he encountered it. When Tom Bradley expressed frustration about his inability to find meaning in his work as a navigator, Marcus helped him see how his skills could be applied to humanitarian missions, guiding relief ships through dangerous space lanes to reach colonies in need. The insight came as a natural result of their conversation, but Marcus had subtly enhanced the probability that Tom would make the connections himself. When engineer Lisa Santos worried about her aging mother back on Mars, Marcus strengthened the likelihood that the experimental medical treatment she'd been researching would prove effective. He couldn't cure disease directly, but he could increase the chances that the right doctors would make the right discoveries at the right time. The hardest part was learning restraint. Marcus could see thousands of ways to improve his crewmates' lives, to solve problems they didn't even know they had. But the observer's warnings echoed in his mind. Transcendence without wisdom led to destruction, and wisdom without compassion was meaningless. He had to trust that his friends were capable of handling their own challenges, that struggle itself had value in ways that easy solutions did not. His role was not to eliminate difficulty from their lives, but to ensure that their efforts to overcome difficulties had the best possible chance of success. The night before they reached human space, Captain Mitchell called the crew together for their traditional end-of-mission debriefing. They gathered in the ship's common area, sharing coffee and the last of the chocolate rations while reviewing their survey data. All things considered, this turned out to be one of our most successful missions, Mitchell said, scrolling through the geological and astronomical data they'd collected. Despite that incident with the gravitational anomaly, we managed to complete surveys of 17 systems and identified 3 potential sites for future colonization. Marcus listened to his crewmates discuss their findings, but his attention was focused on the probability threads that surrounded each of them. The mission had changed all of them in subtle ways. Maya was more confident about her future plans. Tom had begun to see his work as part of a larger purpose. Dr. Perez, Park had started taking better care of his own health. Lisa had overcome her tendency to second-guess her technical decisions, and none of them realized that these changes had been gently encouraged by their enhanced crewmate. "There's something else," Dr. Park said, looking slightly puzzled as he consulted his medical scanner. "I've been running routine health scans throughout the mission, and all of our biological markers have improved significantly since we encountered that anomaly. Better cardiovascular health, enhanced immune response, improved neural function. It's like whatever field effect we passed through had some kind of beneficial impact on our physiology." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though internally he was fascinated. His transcendence was apparently having unconscious effects on his crewmates, subtly optimizing their biology through proximity to his enhanced quantum field. It was another responsibility to consider, the way his mere presence influenced others without their knowledge or consent. "Could be some kind of beneficial radiation," Tom suggested. "Space is full of phenomena we don't understand yet." "Maybe, Dr. Mine," Park agreed, though he still looked puzzled. "I'll definitely include it in my mission report. Could be important for future survey crews." The conversation drifted to other topics: shore leave plans, family reunions, career decisions that would follow their return to Earth. Marcus contributed when appropriate, but mostly he listened, continuing to strengthen positive probabilities while marveling at the ordinary courage his crewmates displayed every day. They were good people who worked hard, cared about each other, and tried to make the universe a slightly better place through their efforts. They represented the best of humanity, not because they were exceptional, but precisely because they were normal people choosing to act with hope and purpose despite the challenges they faced. As the evening wound down and his crewmates headed to their bunks for the last time aboard the Endeavor, Marcus remained in the common area, looking out through the main viewport at the approaching lights of Luna Station. Tomorrow, they would dock and begin the process of transitioning back to civilian life. In a few weeks, they would scatter across human space to pursue their individual dreams, and Marcus would begin the next phase of his existence, learning to live as a transcendent being among ordinary humans, finding ways to nurture hope without revealing the true extent of what he had become. The Observer had told him there were others like him scattered throughout the galaxy. Eventually, he would need to find them to learn from their experiences and join whatever larger purpose the Transcendent served. But for now, his mission was simpler: to be an example of what humanity could become, one person at a time. Through the viewport, Marcus could see Earth rising beyond Luna's horizon, a blue marble suspended in the cosmic dark, home to 8 billion humans who possessed the potential for transcendence, but had not yet learned to access it. Somewhere on that world, children were being born who might someday make the same choice he had made. Others were facing challenges that would either strengthen their hope or diminish it, depending on circumstances that seemed random but might be influenced by those who understood the deeper patterns. The responsibility was staggering, but Marcus found he wasn't intimidated by it. Hope, he had learned, was not about the certainty of success. It was about the willingness to try regardless of the odds. And if there was one thing humans understood better than any other species in the galaxy, it was the power of refusing to give up. As the Endeavor completed its final approach to Luna Station, Marcus Chen, minor engineer, and now something far more significant, began planning his return to a world that had no idea it was about to be gently guided toward its own transcendence. The whispers in the ruins had been answered. Now it was time to see what humanity could accomplish when one of its own had learned to work with the fundamental forces of possibility itself. The real adventure was just beginning. 6 months after returning to Earth, Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the New Geneva Education Center, watching Maya lead a classroom of 12-year-olds through a basic stellar cartography lesson. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Earth's moon hung in the afternoon sky, providing a perfect visual aid for her explanation of orbital mechanics. Now, who can tell me why we always see the same face of the moon? Maya asked, her voice carrying clearly through the intercom system. A boy from one of the outer colonies raised his hand eagerly. Because the moon is tidally locked to Earth. Its rotation period matches its orbital period. Excellent, Chen. And why is that important for navigation? Marcus smiled at the irony of the boy sharing his surname. A common enough name, but still amusing given the circumstances. He could see the probability threads flowing around the classroom, bright with curiosity and potential. Several of these children would grow up to become engineers, pilots, and scientists. One girl near the back would eventually design the navigation systems for the first generation of truly interstellar colony ships. But more than their individual futures, Marcus could see the broader impact Maya was having. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her teaching style engaging children who might otherwise have seen education as irrelevant to their lives. The hope she was nurturing in this classroom would ripple outward, affecting families and communities in ways that would strengthen humanity's expansion into the galaxy. It had taken careful probability manipulation to ensure Maya got this position. Not changing her qualifications or forcing the selection committee's decision, but simply making sure the right connections happened at the right time, that her application arrived when the committee was in a receptive mood, that a minor scheduling conflict didn't prevent her from attending the interview. The results spoke for themselves. Maya had been teaching for 5 months now, and her student evaluations were consistently outstanding. More importantly, she was happy in a way that radiated outward. Mr. Chen? Marcus turned to find Director Sarah Vance approaching, a slight woman in her 60s who had spent her entire career working to improve educational opportunities for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. The probability threads around her glowed with dedication and purpose. She was exactly the kind of person Marcus had learned to look for, someone whose natural inclinations toward hope could be strengthened with subtle enhancement. Director Vance, how can I help you? I've been reviewing the reports from our engineering instructors, and your name keeps coming up. Several of them have mentioned how helpful your guest lectures had been for our older students. Marcus had been volunteering at the center since Maya started working there, ostensibly as a way to stay connected with his crewmate, but actually as part of his broader mission to nurture hope wherever he found it. His enhanced perception allowed him to see which students were struggling with specific concepts, making it easy to adjust his teaching approach to reach each individual. I enjoy working with the kids, he said simply. They ask good questions. They do indeed. That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. Director Vance paused, consulting the datapad in her hands. We've had several requests from other educational centers asking about our improved student performance metrics. Test scores are up across all subjects, but the biggest improvements are in science and engineering, exactly the areas where you've been most involved. Marcus felt a familiar tension between pride and caution. His enhanced abilities were having exactly the effect he'd hoped for, but he couldn't let anyone realize the true source of the improvements. Good teachers make a big difference, he said. Maya and the others are doing excellent work. They are, but there's something more happening here. Student confidence is higher, dropout rates are lower, and we're seeing increased interest in advanced placement courses. It's as if the students have developed a greater sense of what's possible for their futures. That was exactly what was happening, Marcus realized. His presence was subtly enhancing the probability streams around hope and ambition, making it easier for students to believe in their own potential. The effect was indirect but measurable. Children were more willing to take risks, more likely to see challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles. Would you consider a formal teaching position? Director Vance asked. We have funding for a new instructor in applied engineering, and I think you'd be perfect for the role. Marcus considered the offer carefully. A permanent position would give him greater opportunity to influence young minds at a crucial developmental stage. But it would also tie him down to one location when his transcendent responsibilities might require greater mobility. Before he could answer, his enhanced perception caught something troubling. Probability threads surrounding one of the students in Maya's classroom had suddenly shifted toward darker possibilities. Marcus focused his attention on the disturbance and immediately identified the source, Kevin Okoye, a 13-year-old from the Luna colonies whose parents had been killed in a mining accident. The boy's foster placement was failing. Marcus could see the probability patterns clearly now. Kevin was about to run away from his current home, planning to stow away on a cargo hauler bound for the Outer Rim. The chances of him surviving such an attempt were minimal. Director Vance, I'm sorry, but could we continue this conversation later? There's something I need to check on. Without waiting for a response, Marcus headed for Maya's classroom, his mind racing through potential interventions. Direct action was out of the question. He couldn't simply tell the authorities about Kevin's plans without explaining how he knew. But there might be other ways to influence the situation. He reached the classroom just as Maya was dismissing her students for lunch break. Kevin was hanging back, clearly troubled about something. Marcus could see the probability threads around the boy's decision point. He was planning to make his escape attempt that evening. "Kevin," Marcus called out as the other students filed past, "could you help me with something?" The boy looked up suspiciously. Kevin was intelligent but had been hardened by loss and disappointment. The probability streams around him showed a complex tangle of anger, fear, and desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might actually care about what happened to him. "What kind of help?" Kevin asked. "I'm working on a project to design better safety systems for mining operations. Since you grew up around the mines on Luna, I thought you might have some insights that could help." It was true, in a way. Marcus had been developing improved safety protocols in his spare time, using his enhanced perception to identify failure modes that conventional analysis might miss. But more importantly, the project gave him a reason to engage with Kevin on a topic the boy understood better than most adults. "Why do you care?" Kevin asked bluntly. "Everyone always says they want to help, but they're just trying to make themselves feel better about the system being broken." Marcus could see the pain behind the cynicism. Kevin had learned to protect himself by expecting disappointment. But beneath the defensive shell there remained a spark of hope that desperately wanted to believe someone might genuinely care. "Because I've seen what happens when safety systems fail," Marcus said quietly. "I've dug through collapsed tunnels looking for survivors, knowing the chances were slim but unable to stop trying. Your parents died because the people designing those systems had never actually worked in the mines themselves. Maybe together we can design something better." Kevin studied Marcus for a long moment, and Marcus could feel the probability thread shifting as the boy's curiosity warred with his cynicism. Finally, the curiosity won. What kind of safety systems? Over the next hour, Marcus found himself in an impromptu engineering discussion with one of the most insightful young minds he'd ever encountered. Kevin's direct experience with mining operations, combined with his natural analytical ability, allowed him to identify practical problems that would never occur to someone who had only studied the systems theoretically. More importantly, the conversation gave Marcus the opportunity to subtly enhance the probability streams around Kevin's future. He strengthened the likelihood that the boy's current foster family would recognize his intelligence and potential. He increased the chances that Kevin would channel his anger into productive pursuits rather than destructive ones. Most crucially, he helped Kevin begin to see himself not as a victim of circumstances beyond his control, but as someone with the knowledge and ability to prevent others from experiencing the losses he had endured. "You know," Marcus said as they finished reviewing his preliminary safety designs, "there's a scholarship program for students from the outer colonies who are interested in engineering. The application deadline is next month." "I'm not smart enough for something like that," Kevin replied automatically, but Marcus could see the hope threads brightening around the possibility. "Kevin, in the last hour you've identified 3 critical failure points in my designs and suggested improvements that I never would have thought of. You're exactly smart enough for something like that." The probability stream shifted again as Kevin began to consider the possibility seriously. Marcus reinforced the positive pathways, not forcing the outcome, but making it easier for Kevin to believe in his own potential. Would you help me with the application?" Kevin asked hesitantly. "I'd be honored to," Marcus replied, and he meant it completely. As Kevin left to join his classmates for lunch, Marcus felt a familiar satisfaction that came from successfully nurturing hope where it had been lacking. But more than that, he sensed something larger. Kevin would grow up to become one of the foremost experts in mining safety, his innovations saving thousands of lives and preventing countless families from experiencing the loss he had endured. That was beautifully done. Marcus turned to find Director Vance watching from the classroom doorway, her expression thoughtful. "He's a good kid," Marcus said. "Just needed someone to believe in him. Yes, he did. And now he does." Director Vance stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've been watching you work with our students for months now, Marcus. You have an extraordinary ability to reach children that others have given up on. It's not just teaching skill, it's something deeper." Marcus felt a moment of concern. Had he been too obvious in his manipulations? Were the pattern of positive outcomes around him becoming noticeable? "I just try to see the potential in each student," he said carefully. "And that's why I'm going to ask you again. Would you consider a formal position here? Not just as a teacher, but as a counselor and mentor for our most at-risk students. Children like Kevin who need someone who can see beyond their current circumstances to what they might become." Marcus looked around Maya's empty classroom, thinking about Kevin and the other students he'd already begun working with. The position would allow him to influence the development of hundreds of young minds, nurturing hope at a crucial stage when it was most vulnerable and most powerful. But more than that, he could see the broader implications. The students he helped here would go on to influence others, creating ripple effects that would spread throughout human society. Enhanced education in the colonies, improved safety standards in dangerous industries, breakthrough innovations that would advance humanity's expansion into the galaxy, all of it traceable back to seeds of hope planted in a classroom on Earth. "I accept," he said. Director Vance smiled, and Marcus could see the probability threads around her brighten with satisfaction and relief. "Excellent. I'll have the paperwork prepared. When can you start?" "Immediately," Marcus replied, already planning how to structure his new role for maximum positive impact. As Director Vance left to handle the administrative details, Marcus remained in the classroom, watching through the windows as students ate lunch in the courtyard below. Each young mind represented infinite potential, countless possible futures that could be shaped by the choices they made and the hope they carried. He thought about the Observer, still cataloging civilizations across the galaxy, still searching for that rare spark of transcendent potential. He thought about the other transcendent humans who must be out there somewhere, working quietly to nurture hope in their own spheres of influence. But mostly he thought about Kevin Okoye and the thousands of other young people who would pass through this center in the coming years. Each one would carry forward a little more hope than they'd had before, a little more belief in what was possible. The whispers in the ruins had detected a human heartbeat for the first time in 10 million years, and that heartbeat had chosen to become something extraordinary. But the true measure of transcendence wouldn't be found in Marcus's individual abilities or achievements. It would be found in the countless lives he touched, the hope he nurtured, and the future he helped make possible for a species that had never learned to give up on tomorrow. Through the classroom window, Marcus could see Maya leading another group of students in an astronomy exercise, pointing out the locations of distant colonies and explaining how navigation systems made interstellar travel possible. Beyond them, Earth's moon continued its ancient orbit, tidally locked but always moving forward. It was a perfect metaphor for transcendence itself, bound by natural laws, but free to explore infinite possibilities within those constraints. And somewhere among those students watching Maya's lesson, future explorers were learning to reach for the stars. Marcus Chen smiled and began planning his first official day as humanity's newest guardian of hope. The real adventure was just beginning. .ss